There is a number sitting quietly behind everything you are about to hear, and once it clicks into place, you will never look at this US Open the same way again. 94,000. That is roughly how many Filipinos call New York City home right now, and in a matter of days, a tennis player who did not even hold a top 50 ranking 12 months ago is about to walk into the exact neighborhood where the largest concentration of them in the entire country lives. All at the same moment the biggest tournament in American tennis opens its gates. This is not a coincidence you can shrug off. This is a collision that has been building for months across 3 different cities. And nobody involved. Not the tournament, not her rivals. Not even her own team, like seems entirely sure how big it gets once it lands in Queens. So before you decide whether explode is just a dramatic word choice for a headline, let's walk through exactly what happened everywhere she has played this summer. Because the pattern is not subtle and it is not slowing down. Start with the simplest fact, the one that should already stop you. A year ago, Eala was ranked 53rd in the world. Respectable, sure, but hardly a name causing panic in anyone's draw. Today she sits at 18. That is not a gradual climb, that is a sprint, the kind of jump that usually comes with a signature run at a major or a season-defining title, and in her case, it came with both. In August, she walked into Washington and did something no Filipino tennis player, man or woman, had ever done in the history of the sport. She won a WTA Tour Singles title. Not a small one either. She beat world number 3 Jessica Pegula in the final, coming back from a set down, grinding through a match that rain delays stretched deep into the night, and closing it out 4-6, 6-4, 6-4. Sit with that scoreline for a second. That is not a player getting lucky on a good day. That is a player who lost the first set to one of the best returners on tour and simply refused to let the match slip away from her. And if Washington was the proof that she belonged, Wimbledon was the proof that she could adapt. She reached the 4th round on grass, a surface almost nobody expected her to master this early, and along the way she knocked out the tournament's reigning champion. Not a name padding a draw, a genuine high-profile win on the one surface where her game was supposed to be the least comfortable. Now here's the detail that most people covering this story keep sliding past without pausing on it. Queens, New York holds the single highest concentration of Filipino residents anywhere in the United States. And Queens is exactly where the US Open is played, every single year, no exceptions. So this was never just a story about a rising ranking or a breakout title. This became a story about timing, about an athlete's best season of her career lining up almost too perfectly, with the one tournament sitting inside the largest pocket of her own fan base in the entire country. That is the setup. Now let's talk about what actually happens when her fans show up, because the pattern across the last 3 tournaments should make you very curious about what New York has in store. Washington came first, and honestly, the flags alone should have told everyone what was coming. Filipino flags did not just appear during her matches and disappear afterward. They covered the grounds for the entire tournament, match after match, day after day, an unmistakable presence that had nothing to do with who else was playing. Fans sat through other players' matches they had no real interest in, purely to hold their seats and protect their spot for whenever Alex stepped on court next. Think about that for a second. That is not casual fandom. That is not a crowd that showed up because they had a free afternoon. That is a crowd that made a calculated decision to occupy space and refuse to give it up, which is a very different kind of commitment than simply buying a ticket and watching a match. Then came Toronto, and the energy did not just continue, it jumped a full gear. Her 3rd round match against Alicia Park sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. Not days, hours. That is the kind of demand tournaments usually reserve for finals featuring the biggest names in the sport. Not a 3rd round match involving a player who, at the time, had not even won a title yet. And here's a detail that tells you the demand was not just loud, it was structural. A food vendor inside the arena actually restructured its menu that week because the wave of Filipino fans coming through the gates created demand nobody had planned for. Stop and think about what that actually means. A business inside a professional tennis venue changed what it was selling because of one player's following. That is not hype. That is measurable operational impact, the kind that shows up in a vendor's sales numbers and forces a real-world decision. And Toronto, remember, does not even come close to having the Filipino population that a city like New York has. So if a fraction of that community could sell out a 3rd round match in hours and rewrite a food menu, the obvious question becomes, what happens when you multiply that reaction by 10? Cincinnati answered that question, and it did not answer quietly. Former professional player Sam Querrey, courtside at the event, said publicly that Alex's presence drove ticket prices up across the entire tournament, not just for her matches, for the whole event. He described watching hundreds, then thousands of Philippine flags flooding the venue more than he had ever witnessed there in any previous year he had attended. But here is the part of his comments that stuck with people the most. The detail he kept coming back to. It was not just the flags. It was the fans who stayed until the very last point of every single session she played, night after night, even when leaving early would have meant beating the traffic and getting home hours sooner. Think about the choice being made there. Anyone can buy a ticket. Staying until midnight on a weeknight, refusing to leave a single point unwatched, refusing to trade convenience for loyalty, that is a completely different category of commitment. That is the kind of devotion most professional sports franchises spend decades trying to manufacture through marketing campaigns and loyalty programs, and most of them never actually get there. This community got there organically in real time, across 3 tournaments in a single summer. So look at the pattern laid out in front of you. Washington, Toronto, Cincinnati. 3 different cities, 3 different sizes of Filipino population, and every single one produced a bigger reaction than the city before it. Nobody involved seems to have mapped out where the ceiling actually sits, because every city broke whatever the previous ceiling was supposed to be. And now she is walking into the city where the Filipino community is not just large. It is the largest in the entire country, sitting in the exact same borough as the tournament itself. If the trend held in cities with a fraction of New York's Filipino population, what exactly is supposed to happen when it meets the real thing? Here is where a lot of people are getting the story slightly wrong though, and it is worth slowing down on this part because it changes the entire framing. You might assume this is pure organic momentum, word spreading naturally online, more fans discovering her with each tournament, the wave simply growing on its own through social media and word of mouth. That is part of it, sure, but it is not the whole story, and treating it as the whole story misses something important. The US Open did not sit back and wait to see what would happen when Alex arrived. They planned around her weeks in advance, before a single ball was struck in New York, before the tournament even began. Organizers placed her inside the Stars of the Open, a curated showcase event held on Arthur Ashe Stadium itself, alongside some of the sport's most closely watched next-generation names. Players like João Fonseca and Lerner Tien. That is not a minor scheduling footnote. That is putting a player who does not yet hold a Grand Slam title on the same marquee stage as the sport's most hyped young stars, specifically because organizers understood what her presence would draw. And separately, they handed her a wild card into the Mixed Doubles Championship, pairing her with Felix Auger-Aliassime. Neither of those decisions had anything to do with her singles ranking. Neither one was required. Both were deliberate choices, made by tournament organizers with full knowledge of what had already happened in 3 other cities that summer. Here's an analogy that makes the whole thing click. When a city knows a concert is going to overwhelm its main venue, it does not just wait for the crowd to show up and then scramble to figure out logistics on the fly. It builds a second stage ahead of time because the ticket data already told them exactly what was coming. That is essentially what the US Open just did. They watched Washington, they watched Toronto, they watched Cincinnati, and they made a calculated, proactive decision that Alex's presence in New York was going to be too large to leave unplanned. That single realization reframes this entire story. This is not just a passionate fan base generating organic energy that happens to get a little bigger with every city. This is the largest tennis tournament in America, an organization with every incentive to be conservative and cautious, choosing to build infrastructure around one player's presence before the tournament even starts. The explosion everyone keeps predicting for New York is not a guest dressed up as a dramatic headline. It is the logical, evidence-based outcome of an organization that has already watched this exact pattern play out 3 times and decided deliberately to prepare for a 4th. And if the pattern itself is not convincing enough on its own, listen to the people who were actually standing inside it when it happened, because they did not stay quiet either. At Cincinnati, tournament officials did not deflect the question when asked about the atmosphere. One official spoke publicly about what he witnessed, describing hundreds, then thousands of Philippine flags, more than any previous year in the tournament's history. He talked about fans moving through the event as a genuine community, not as scattered individuals who simply happened to be sitting near each other. And then he repeated one specific detail twice, unprompted. Fans staying through every single last point of every session Alex played, no matter how late it ran into the night. That is not a passing comment from a junior staffer trying to fill airtime. That is a tournament official speaking after her run had already ended, choosing to specifically highlight the impact of one player. That kind of statement does not happen by accident, and it does not happen for just anyone. Then there is Amanda Anisimova, the player who actually beat Alex in that Cincinnati match. After the win, she did not dodge the question about the atmosphere in the stadium, and she did not downplay her opponent's following either. She acknowledged Alex directly, calling her a great player and a fighter, saying she had genuinely expected a tough match because of it. And then she added something that landed harder than anything else said that week. She talked about the crowd specifically, noting that there was real support for her too that night, and that she appreciated it because she understood just how loved Alex is. Read that again slowly. The winner of the match felt it necessary to publicly recognize her opponent's following, unprompted in her own post-match comments. That does not happen for a player ranked 18th in the world unless the atmosphere inside that building made it genuinely impossible to ignore, even from the winning side of the net. Now put all of that against the geography, because this is where the story stops being impressive and starts being genuinely unprecedented. Every single one of those moments, the sellout in Toronto, the surging ticket prices in Cincinnati, the flags blanketing the grounds in Washington, happened in cities where the Filipino population is a fraction of what lives in New York. 94,000 people in Queens alone. Right where this tournament is played is not a number comparable to anywhere else Alex has competed this year. That is the largest built-in audience she has ever had access to in her career, and it is not particularly close. So here's where all of this actually lands. The word explode is not a dramatic choice made for a thumbnail or a headline designed to bait a click. It is a pattern confirmed by tournament officials, confirmed by her own opponents, confirmed by vendors who rewrote their menus, and confirmed by fans who stayed past midnight on weeknights rather than leave a single point unwatched. That pattern has now repeated across 3 separate cities, each one bigger than the last, and it is about to collide with the single largest version of itself that exists anywhere in the country. Every piece of it lines up. The ranking climbed from 53rd to 18th in 12 months. The historic first WTA title for a Filipino player. The 4th round breakthrough on grass at Wimbledon. The sellouts, the menu changes, the rising ticket prices across entire events, and the public statements from people who had absolutely no reason to inflate what they saw and chose to highlight it anyway. But there is a second side to this story that deserves just as much attention, because momentum like this does not come free, and it is worth being honest about that instead of only celebrating it. For Alex, walking into the US Open means carrying something no Filipino tennis player has ever carried into a Grand Slam before. Not just a ranking, not just a breakthrough title, but an entire community, the largest version of it anywhere in the country, showing up in the same borough where she will need to compete, physically and mentally, for 2 straight weeks. That is an extraordinary amount of weight to carry at 21 years old, an age where most players are still figuring out how to handle pressure in front of a few thousand fans, let alone tens of thousands who feel personally invested in every single point. And energy like that genuinely moves in 2 directions. It can lift a player to a level she has never reached before, the kind of run that gets written about for years. It can also become a source of pressure that sits heavily on top of an already brutal stretch of tennis. Washington, then Toronto, then Cincinnati, then an exhibition appearance, then a mixed doubles campaign, all compressed into a matter of weeks with barely any time to reset in between. That schedule alone would test any player's body and focus. Add a community's worth of expectation on top of it, and you have a genuinely unpredictable situation heading into the biggest stage of her career so far. Nobody actually knows yet which version of this story is about to play out. Not the tournament, not her coaching team, not the 94,000 people getting ready to fill those stands the moment she steps onto a court in Queens. What we do know with total certainty is that this pattern has never once gotten smaller from one city to the next. It has grown every single time it has been tested, and now it is about to meet the largest crowd it has ever encountered. Whatever happens over the next 2 weeks at Flushing Meadows, one thing already feels true before a single ball is struck in New York. This has quietly become one of the most significant moments Filipino tennis has ever produced on American soil. And the only real question left is how loud it gets once it finally arrives home. once it finally arrives home.